Welcome to the Sage Women podcast, hosted by Melanie White and Dr. Nick Engera. We have real conversations with real women, health professionals, and coaches who share stories about perimenopause, menopause, and a range of women's health issues. Please subscribe so you get the latest updates every fortnight.
Hi, it's Melanie White here on the Sage Women podcast, and I'm really pleased to be speaking today to Tanya Rutherford from Queen Bee. Tanya, welcome and thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Melanie.
I'm really excited to talk to you about, I guess, the priority areas for menopause now and in the future. But before we jump in and talk a bit about some of those things, can you tell us a little bit about your backstory, how you got to this point where you are today?
Yeah, sure. I guess in terms of my own working history, it's kind of been an interesting journey. I've kind of shifted around from initially doing accounting to business management, to leadership and management, coaching and development, but then also moving into more of that personal growth and personal awareness. And then eventually, I think bringing that to my desire to really support regional, rural, and remote women, particularly. And in my own life transition at the moment, bringing menopause into that mix. And so, really looking at, okay, well, how do we support women generally through this midlife phase, but also really focusing on the women who don't have access to a lot of the support services or a lot of education opportunities that our metro counterparts might have access to, whether or not they actually get there or not.
There's quite a disparity between city girls and country girls.
It is, and yet it's interesting because when you look at the stats, you see this sort of transition point at this life phase of like that 45 to 50 is when we're starting to see more women in that older bracket in the regions. And it's sort of, you sort of almost see it, it's like a bell curve. They kind of start off, they're all wanting to be in the city, and then they kind of get to that point and they kind of go, actually, you know what? Maybe my life needs to look something different. And I guess that's one of the big things where I look at midlife, not just the menopause experience itself. And I guess why menopause is such a big thing for me. So I initially started experiencing symptoms when I was 38. I had a 1-year-old. I was pregnant or early days pregnant with my second. And I started getting what I now know was hormonal related anxiety. Now that just kept building and building. And it was actually a couple of years before I even went and saw my doctor about it because it was so overwhelming. I couldn't talk about it. Yeah. And yeah, it wasn't till I was about 44 that a friend actually said to me, I think what you have is perimenopause. And I'm like, what the hell is that? Like, I've never heard of that. And that was, 5 and a bit years ago, because I'm nearly 50 now. And even when I didn't even talk about that with the doctor at the stage. I wasn't on strong medication, which I'm grateful for. But we're all wise in hindsight, aren't we? Like, I now know, now that I'm on menopause hormone therapy, that my anxiety just disappeared straight away. It was like the first thing that went. But you're kind of going through that journey and you're not even sure what conversation to have with GP. And it wasn't till I started having hot flushes when I was 47. And I'm like, okay, I know this is definitely a symptom of menopause. And when I went and saw him, and he's a lovely doctor, but he's a male. He doesn't have the lived experience. So, yeah. And his sort of response was, oh yeah, no, that sounds like menopause, but you're really young. It normally doesn't happen till 51, as if all the symptoms suddenly appeared at 51 and then we were, and everything happened at that age. And that's when I really started researching it. So I started looking in, well, what is this menopause thing? What are the symptoms? And I actually, because this is the kind of person I am, when I was doing the research, I created some little basic infographics about what menopause was and perimenopause and the ages and, basic stats and things like that. And then I sent it out to every GP in town that had an email address. And so the
Wow.
next time I went and saw my GP, and he said, "How are you going?" I said, I'm menopause. He goes, "No, no, no, it's perimenopause." And so I'm like, so even though I didn't get a response from the email, at least I felt like there was an impact happening, like someone was reading it and they were learning and it's really hard for you doctors because one, they don't get the training in medical school about it. And I mean, they get maybe a day, and we are 100% hormonal beings as women. That's like what we do.
Yeah.
And yet we're expecting them to be the experts in everything,
Yeah.
but they're general practitioners. So they're trying to know a bit about everything. And yet when you're positioned as that expert, then that's really hard to ask for help or to be seen as not knowing things. So we really make it difficult for them. So there was that side of things. And then the other thing was that the more research I found, particularly around the impact on pre-existing neurological conditions and mental health, the more I started to really question whether the loss of my cousin through suicide when she was 44 was actually related to perimenopause, like that as the trigger. So she had bipolar and she was a high performing C-suite executive kind of person. And when her brain started to not feel like it was doing the things she was expecting and she went to her specialist, he was, as I understand, quite dismissive. And it was like, well, this is the best it's going to be. It's only downhill from here. And for someone who that was her life, not feeling like you could no longer rely on your brain was just not something that she could manage. And the more research you do hear that, that there are women who are like one of our largest suicide rates is in this age range because there is so much going on. And I don't think we have the awareness and we're having the conversations. And we're certainly not got the right support in place. Now,
and
I know.
Sorry, Tanya, I just want to say I'm really sorry for your loss too. That must have been very difficult for you. And I can hear also that that's part of your drive to make a difference, to work in this area, to help other people not go down that same pathway.
Yeah, and I mean, I was I was actually pregnant with my first child, so it was just before I started getting my symptoms. She was 44, and I had no idea at the time but it was, looking back, and it's just like, how many people do we have to lose before it becomes important enough to actually take some real strong action against? And the losses aren't always like someone dies, but sometimes it's the loss of, the women who leave the workforce because they can't function and then they can't get back in again because then, it's too long. And, the women who, their relationships break down because they don't understand how everything's working and they've not necessarily got that support and awareness in their family. And so then they might end up, potentially out on the street because we don't have the same financial support. It's really complicated, everything that sort of comes in. And at this age, we've got so many things happening and so many pressures that are placed on us, but we also bring on ourselves as well.
They call it an intersectional concern. And when you look at all, as you said, looking at midlife and all of the things that are happening at midlife, it's a lot. Even one of those things is a lot. Stepping into career advancement, helping kids finish their high school, having kids leaving home, perhaps reevaluating your partnership and sometimes separation or not. Whether you even have a partner and how that impacts your ability to look after yourself and earn an income, how stable is your job? Are you caring for a relative, an older relative, and all of the other things, plus
Yeah.
then menopause?
Yeah. And I know
It's another log on the fire.
it is. And I know this year I've really struggled with the brain fog, which when you're trying to run your own business and you're trying to create things and trying to organize, it is incredibly hard. Like you you can't feel your way to the end of a sentence, let alone to actually feel like the functioning person that you're used to being and that you expect of yourself.
Tanya, just on that, can you tell us, how do you deal with brain fog in that moment? You said it's been tough for you this year. I'd love to know, what is it that you do to make sense of that or to get through it?
Um, Look, it's been really challenging, and I think for a lot of us, we're kind of brought up in a unless you're dead, you keep going kind of thing.
Yeah.
um, but for me, it was like I felt blessed because I was working with other people in this space that I could say that. I could say, look, my brain's really foggy at the moment and I'm really struggling. So just bear with me, we'll get there. Which I don't think women feel safe to do in most jobs. Like I was very
Yeah.
fortunate in that space. I wrote a lot of notes. I just stopped relying on my memory at all. If it had to be in my calendar or it
Mm.
wasn't going to happen. And, the number of times I had to move my microwave because it was next to the fridge and I kept opening the fridge to put something in the microwave and it was driving me batty. So I had
Wow.
to just
Yeah.
stupid things,
That's a
stupid
great
things.
idea, though. You realized that this was happening, and so you made some structural changes, and you're also writing notes and saying it's got to be in the calendar or it doesn't happen.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess for me, I've got my eldest is 12. And so we're going through the starts of puberty. Well, I'm going through reverse puberty, and so there is a lot of me saying, I know that I'm not coping well today. So I just letting you know that this could go bad for us. But having those open conversations and even like with my husband is being able to say to him, it's that menopause thing today. Don't rely on me for anything. I can't do
Mm.
it. If it's not this, or this, it's beyond my capacity right now. And so
Mm.
he's actually taken up more things in terms of organizing stuff that I would normally have done in the past because I've just had to flag, I can't do it. It's not going
Yeah.
to happen. I'm not even putting it on my radar of things that I'm trying to do. It's just not making the list. Sorry, babe. You're going to
Mm.
have to man up.
Yeah. Communication, clear communication, speaking up about your needs and your capacity to the people closest to you, to the people at work. You mentioned it was psychologically safe for you to do that.
Mm.
I'm thinking it must have taken initially a bit of courage to be able to do that.
Um, I can't remember. My brain is that foggy. But it sort of, I mean, it does, but because I'm in this space, it's different. Like, I think,
Mm.
uh, like, if I think about most workplaces that I've been in my life, I would not have felt comfortable admitting weakness. Like, when I've
Mm.
admitted I'm, struggling in the past, I've had a manager say to me, well, don't bother coming back next year because I don't want someone who's not giving 100%.
Wow.
And that was a woman who was a similar age to me. I'd gone through a year of bullying under her management. Like she wasn't the one bullying me, but she knew
Mm.
about all that, but there wasn't even any sympathy there for that. So there's no way I would have felt comfortable talking about how I
Yeah.
felt and what was going on for me.
Mm.
So it is hard. And then if you've got male managers who may not have had an experience and like whether they've had conversations with their wives or they're not at that age, it's really hard because we just don't have that that general openness about it. Like we're okay with puberty. We kind of go, oh yeah, teenagers, they get they grunt and they go through this phase where they can't communicate and
they
stuff's
get
going
pimples
on.
and yeah.
Yeah, all that stuff. And we go
Yeah.
through the same thing. Like I had pimples for years after my kids because of hormones, damn it. But we're not open to like, and I think there's a lot of things in that. Like there's definitely the negative connotations of menopause. It's this old woman thing, and then you sort of gone out to pasture kind of thing. You're no good to anyone. And then there's also the things of like, well, we don't talk about it because we're afraid of what will happen. Much like, pregnancy, we may not get a job because people are afraid we're going to have a baby. Do they then get worried that we're not going to be able to function for like, a couple of months or, some days? So there's a lot of our societal expectations and cultural beliefs kind of, make a mess of things. And I mean, that's white society that I'm familiar with. Like, then you've got, depending on what other culture you come from, then you've got those kind of positives or negatives that come into it as well.
Yeah. And then it comes down to how much can you take as an individual of putting up with your symptoms and staying silent and not asking for help. I think there's at some point a tipping point for us all that you either speak up or you make another decision. It's pretty hard to grind it out when you're going through so much.
Yeah, and like I spent a lot of, again, being blessed that I was working from home, is that when things got too much, I could actually have a nap or I could go into my bedroom and have a cry or whatever it was I needed just to release the tension or the whatever, the build up, and then I could keep going. But for a lot of women, that's really hard. I mean, like the whole working from home thing as an option and that trust that goes with it. I mean, we don't not do the work, but having that flexibility to do it around what else is going on, whether that's, hormonally, whether that's life, whatever, it's a very freeing experience. Like, I think COVID gave us a lot of opportunities, and it's actually been really sad that people have gone back into that I don't trust my workers, fear state kind of thing. And there's always, I mean, there are some people who take advantage of those things, but for most people, having those as an option and that flexibility, it can be a real game changer, and it really helps with your workforce and productivity and the trust and the teamwork and how people feel as like being valued and respected and all those things that are critical.
I've been working from home since 2007 when I moved from Perth to the other side of Australia. And it was incredibly tough at first because all we had at the time was Skype and a shared intranet and the phone. And suddenly being in the office of one that's inside your house, no commute every day, no social interaction, it's actually really tough. But in this age now, we've, as you say, had COVID, and there's been that opportunity to figure out, well, how do we do it well? What can we learn from it? And in what circumstances do we maintain some level of working from home? It's really great that we have the chance to look at hybrid working models to support women. And as you said, being able to stay at home and have a nap if you needed to, or have a cry if you needed to. I bet that felt like a real gift.
Oh, absolutely. But it meant I could keep going. Like, it wasn't like I was just sitting there staring at a screen going, come on, brain, think, although I did have those moments. But I could, say, okay, it's not working. I need to go outside for a walk or I need to do something and just
manage your
break the
energy.
pattern. Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it is just that, like being outside and, getting some sunlight and nature and all those things really does help your brain just to like reset a bit, which I think is really important.
It's a great discussion so far, Tanya, and we've talked about lots of different things. I wonder if you could narrow it down, in your opinion, to what are perhaps one or two, or at the most three priority areas for us in terms of menopause. And it might be influenced by your experience, but or what's happening generally, but really keen to hear what you think we should be focusing on.
Yeah, look, I think the first step is that education awareness phase. Now, I know that there's a lot of us now working that space, trying to have the conversations. I think one of the big areas where it's lacking is actually changing, and like I'm talking off the top of my head, I don't know this for sure, but I feel like changing that education for our medical experts is the key step. So our doctors, whether they are, been practicing for a while or whether they are in training now, there really needs to be a focus on how do we actually make sure that they are up to date. And, there is that challenge, I think, where a lot of the ongoing education potentially comes from our drug companies who have a vested interest in people being sick because that's how they make their money. And so the way that they think about things and approach things is very different. Whereas I think we need to go back to basics and we need to actually have every doctor, and not just, signing up to something on the Australian Menopause Society to say that they are passionate about it, but they're actually doing the work with, open minds and open hearts and wanting to understand that the journey is different for every woman. And even for women GPs, they may not have had a bad experience, but that doesn't mean that other women aren't going through things. So that sort of compassionate education perspective, I think, is really key. And I feel like we're not getting it. And it's not just your general practitioners, general practitioners. It is anyone who deals with a woman. I don't care whether that is from like puberty right through to menopause and beyond. But, if it's oncology, they need to understand the nuances, not just if you've had cancer, you shouldn't go on menopause hormone therapy, but okay, this was a hormone-related cancer. It's important that you look at other options, or it wasn't, so maybe that is an option for you. But, women really trust their doctors. Like that is, and that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to look at these people and say, you've done all this training, you are the experts. We don't want to have to rely on Dr. Google for everything, because some of the advice women give other women on Facebook, for example, is disturbing. We need to have the experts who have the expert knowledge in us as women, and the fact that we are all different. And, the fact that a lot of the medications that are being dispensed have been around since before we were included in medical studies. So they're not including hormonal variations, and they're relying on us being the equivalent of a 70-kilo white male, regardless of what we are.
Yeah.
So I think that's really the key part. I think that first step. I think the second one is that open conversations everywhere. So the work that you guys are doing in workplaces, the work that I'm trying to do, getting word out to regional women and, and to women in our metros as well, where it's safe to have those conversations. It's safe to ask those questions, and you don't have to wait till you're in the midst of it before anyone raises it. That, we're sort of having that conversation of like, okay, so this is what puberty is. And guess what? At some stage, there's going to be this opposite effect. And, whatever you're going through, it may be normal, but it may not be. So, getting it checked out, but knowing as well that there's all these other things that as a woman, we're just complex. We're amazing creatures. That's amazing how our brains adapt to these changes in our internal biology. But, wow, we kind of need to know a bit more about it, and not just those of us who are capable and skilled at doing the research, but anyone can understand and have a closer, more aware relationship with their own selves and their own bodies.
So doctors and individual open conversations to raise awareness are two focus areas that you're thinking about.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think so. And I think a lot of the other things come from that. I think once we feel safe to have those conversations, then it's easier to then reach out and say, okay, well, can we get an expert in to talk about what workplace adjustments might be? Can we, have the conversation about what our alternatives are if we've got something that's going on with us, physically or emotionally or mentally? I think it all comes from that.
Yeah, this is the starting point, that we're kind of laying the groundwork for future growth. Interesting, when you were talking about Googling, I know, having spoken to doctors and psychologists, that what they hate is when people consult Google and come in armed with that information, which may be right or wrong. And I heard of a coffee mug the other day that said, "Don't compare your Google search with my medical degree." And I thought, yeah, it's an interesting part of it, because we are looking for information. We're turning to doctors. We really need our doctors to be across the key points and talking to us with compassion without being dismissive. So, Tanya, thinking about your focus for the coming year, for 2025, what's your energy going into for 2025 in this space?
Well, my energy is really focusing at the moment on our online menopause summit. Well, menopause and midlife, because whether you're having a bad menopause experience or whether it's really you're one of those lucky people that just kind of flows through it, in which case I hate you. But anyway, we all have all those health things that are going to start happening about now. And so we all need to have those conversations and that awareness. And maybe that's it. Maybe it's we stop using the word menopause and we start using something else instead, so it doesn't have a lot of that stigma. But yeah, so my menopause midlife summit, where we've got heaps of amazing guest speakers from all sorts of perspectives. So we're not just talking the medical side, we're talking the psychological side, relationships, workplaces, the physical strength, so exercise physiology kind of stuff, nutrition, mindfulness, meditation. So just how you kind of like not just survive this experience, but actually go on to feel better and healthier for the rest of your life. Like, we've still got heaps to go. Let's make it awesome. So that's my big one. That's in February. And then after that is when I'm launching a lot of my courses and coaching, which is around that sort of self-awareness, self-transformation thing. So it's once we've got the groundwork in terms of our health and well-being, what do we actually want to do with our lives? Like, what is the meaning that we want? What we know from a lot of the stories and the research is that once we get to this phase and our need to please hormones switch off, so we're not needing to kind of fit in so much and stay safe in the group from a biological perspective of keeping our babies safe and all that sort of thing, is we start going, okay, well, what do I actually want to do with my life, with my part of the life? So what impact do I want to have? What meaning do I want in my life? How do I want to spend the next whatever many years? And so helping women to really uncover what that is and how to then track that path forward. So let's work together to make that a reality for you. And so that's really, I guess, what I want to see is, and my mantra for a long time, for like the last 14 years since I started coaching, has always been about helping people realize their potential and help them bring out their best. And this is how I see myself doing that.
I love that you're bringing in your past skills and strengths into a really specific and purposeful way. It sounds like that's your purpose.
Absolutely. It's so frustrating when you're seeing women stuck, and I mean anyone, but particularly for me, for women feeling stuck, feeling unvalued in where they are. When you know that they're full of so many gifts and so much potential, because they might have raised a family. Like, there is so much involved in that, so many skills, so much that you've given. And then how do we then help you to move into something that's really going to bring you alive and really feel vibrant and amazing. Because God damn it, girl, you're worth it.
I love your passion, Tanya. It's really exciting. All the best for the summit. I hope we can include a link to that in the
Absolutely.
description of this podcast for people who are coming up. And that's like, where will that be? Is that online or in person?
Absolutely. It is online because I want women anywhere to be able to access this stuff. We don't want geography to keep being a barrier for women. So, yeah.
As you mentioned earlier, so important for rural and regional women like us to be able to access those sorts of things, those resources. And Tanya, any last thoughts before we wrap up today? It's been wonderful having you on the podcast and hearing your points of view. Any last words?
I think that the big thing is trust yourself. If things don't feel right, if the advice you're getting doesn't feel like that's your truth, then you need to go and seek additional support. One of the things that we do, and I'll also give you the link to this, so we have a free resource platform as well, where we try and support, I mean, obviously we have our own programs that we're running, but supporting the programs that other women and other organisations are running in this space, because there's something for everyone. And I think it's just really important to be able to find the people that you need to help you get through this part of your journey.
Well said. Lots of options. Find the one that suits you the best and feels right.
Exactly.
Love it. Thanks so much, Tanya. Really look forward to catching up soon, and best of luck with the summit.
Thank you so much.